What's up guys, it's 7X here, and today I'm going to show you guys how to get that low depth of field look, otherwise known as that bokeh look. If you don't know what bokeh is that look where your subject is in focus and everything else is blurred to hell. And if it's done right, it can really make your image pop and emphasize your subject. So how do you get that smooth, buttery, blurred to hell out background? Well, you're gonna need a fast lens, like this f1.8 lens. A fast lens is a lens with a wide aperture, so it lets in a lot of light. But how do you know how wide the aperture on your lens is? Well, you can tell that from your f number. The number on your lens that has a dot in it, like 2.8 or 1.8 or 3.5 or 5.6, something like that, that's your f number. The smaller the number on your lens is, the wider your aperture can open up, and therefore the more light and more bokeh it's going to produce. You can see the difference here with the lens stopped down to f8, and here with the lens opened up to f1.8. The difference is day and night. You can see at f1.8 the background is way blurrier than at f8. That's because, of course, the wider aperture on the lens. And these lenses don't have to be ridiculously expensive. You can get a couple really good cheap lenses that have really fast apertures for pretty cheap. I'll leave some suggestions for some fast, cheap lenses in the description box below so you guys can check them out. But beware, because they're cheap, they may not be top quality, but there are some pretty good ones, like the Canon Nifty 50, that classic Nifty 50 lens, really good bokeh. But let's take a look at implementing bokeh in an actual shoot. How would you go about doing so? Well, we'll start with our subject and our background, and right now it's looking pretty flat. It's not looking very it's flat. There's no bokeh yet. To get that bokeh look, move your subject as far away from the background as possible, because the more distance between the subject and the background, the blurrier that background is going to get. So distance between subject and the background is a major factor in how blurry that background will be. So you have to take this into consideration. If you want to get bokeh in, for example, an indoor setting, you have to make sure the room is big enough to facilitate enough distance between your subject and the background so that you can actually get some discernible bokeh. Another factor that affects the quality of your bokeh is the focal length of your lens. The longer the focal length, the more blurrier and more compressed your background is going to become. So an f1.8 at, for example, 18 millimeters won't look as blurry as an f1.8 at 35 millimeters. But with that knowledge, there is a trick to get bokeh without having to necessarily use fast aperture lenses, but you are going to need telephoto-ish lenses. So if you don't have a fast aperture lens, but you do have like a 200mm lens, you can use that to get bokeh. To get that bokeh look without fast apertures, walk as far away from your background as possible and then zoom in all the way in to get that nice compressed blurry background without necessarily having to use a fast aperture. In fact, this was shot at f5.6, which traditionally isn't considered a fast aperture. But keep in mind, if you want to use this technique, you're going to need a lot of distance between you and your subject to properly frame them in that really long focal length. So probably more applicable to outdoor situations. But remember, blurring your background is only effective if you have a textured background. If your background is just a plain pink wall, blurring that won't do anything. There's nothing to blur. So make sure your background has some type of texture on it so there's something to blur out. Like right now, I'm using these Christmas lights, so there's blurred bokeh balls in the background to make things a little more interesting. And speaking about making things a little more interesting, you can also customize the shape and look of your bokeh for a more stylized look. And it's really simple and easy to do. All you have to do is get a black piece of paper and cut out a shape, then put that over your lens. But keep in mind, you're going to have to use a longer focal length when doing this, because if you use a wider lens, of course, you're just going to get a bunch of vignetting. So something like a 50mm or a 35mm, I guess, is probably best for this type of experiment. But that's basically how to get that bokeh low depth of field look. If you guys have any questions, or better yet, if you guys have any you guys have any tips or tricks on how to maximize the look of your bokeh, leave them in the comment section below. Let's all learn together. Anyways, I'm FNX. Go out and shoot. Sleep well. Bet you guys didn't see that coming, with the background all of a sudden going, God damn!